Hey everybody, I am StickyMz, and I am here with another lore video for you, but this is going to be a different type of lore video. This is lore that doesn't exist. This is real lore, not fan fiction, but it is lore that disappeared one day. It no longer exists. 5 years ago, some data miners found a lore book in the files called Those We've Lost. There was a total of 5 lore stories in this lore book. 2 were centered around this Exo Guardian. 1 was centered around Zavala. Another was Devrim K and his family. And the final one was about the largest pilgrimage to the last city. And I think the most important fact in this lore book is that one of the lore stories, Shaxx takes off his helmet. Now, we do not know why this lore book never made it into the final game. We don't know what happened to it. We do know that some information revolving around Zavala has changed because of the information we got about Zavala's past in Season of the Haunted. But everything else can still work with the same lore that we have today. So without further ado, I would like to tell you all about these stories. If you are interested in reading the lore for yourself, and while it's no longer canon or not canon at this point, I will provide the Google Doc for this lore in the description of this video. The first lore story in this book comes in 2 parts, Defragmentation 1 and Defragmentation 2. It tells the story of Serenity 7 and her ghost Blink. But there's something off about Serenity 7. 1, she kind of enjoys dying. And not in like a Thanonauts type of way where they're trying to experiment and understand death. It's just, she doesn't really care if she dies. And seems to get joy out of it. Even if it puts her team and her ghost at risk. Another issue is that her ghost doesn't seem to be working properly. Her ghost doesn't speak, and every single time Serenity comes back, she comes back a little wrong, very subtly at first. But soon, she tries to make a simple warlock jump, and she can't feel the light anymore and plummets to her death. And when Salone, who was in charge of that mission, comes over to find out what's wrong, she lies and says a scion attacked her, even though she's never really lied before. And eventually, she dies so many times that they counted, the Vanguard counted at the end of her cycle. I'm saying cycle here, and I'll tell you why in a second. She died over 100,000 times. The last time that she was around, she came back so wrong, she went full rampage Stormcaller through the last city, terrorizing merchants and people without even knowing what she was doing. And her ghost wouldn't bring her back anymore. But as Ikora and Zavala and Cade and others looked into her ghost, they noticed that there was something wrong with her companion. There was something wrong with the ghost. And the ghost's corruption is why Serenity kept coming back different. The second lore story revolves around Zavala and his first love. She was a member of this caravan that came to Zavala's village in order to receive help. She was much taller than him. In fact, it says that she was able to rest her chin on his shoulder. And it said that her shoulders were as broad as his. And this kind of makes sense why he now has a thing for Keitel. But once again, given the story that we got in Season of the Haunted with his first wife and his child, I do not know if this story could still make it into actual lore one day and not contradict some things. Now, this story is not just about his first love. It is definitely centered around Zavala coming to terms with that he's going to lose everybody he loves. You see, as the story goes, it doesn't just take place in one time. he watches his love get older, first with gray hair, and eventually she's in an urn, and he doesn't know how to handle that burden. But in this story, we learn that she's the one who got him into knitting, and he would knit scarves when he was stressed and felt sad. And as Shax, who was Zavala's very first friend, takes off his helmet to comfort Zavala. And when Shax comforted Zavala, he says one of the greatest lines I've ever seen. Love and death are heavy stones. They weigh us down, slow us. You see, Shax was known as a player, and it even says as much in this lore passage, that Shax had many relationships, and none of them lasted. So Shax was a hit it and quit it kind of guy, where Zavala was a I'm in this for the long haul kind of guy. And I think this story is very beautiful, yet very sad. And I hope they find a way to incorporate this into lore one day. All right, I know I glossed over this, so I'm going to come back, but I didn't want to ruin the mood of that story. But we're past the mood. We're now on to this. Yeah, Shax took off his helmet. In fact, it even says this is a rare sight, that you would hardly ever see Shax without his helmet on. And maybe that's why we'll never see this lore, because could we actually handle as a community real lore, actual canon lore, where Shax takes off his helmet? I don't know if the Destiny community is ready for such a bold move. The third story in this lore book is called What is a Name? And it's an interviewer talking to Devrim Kay about his lineage and his family. Devrim Kay goes over Devrim Kay the first, second, third, and how they were heroes in their own time. But nobody really knows how many Devrim Kays were out there, because a lot of records got lost during the collapse. And he talks about a few other Devrim Kays, and the Devrim Kay that we know in game is Devrim Kay the 8th, because he says him and Mark are having a child, Devrim Kay the 9th. Now, once again, this is non-canon lore. It hasn't been put in game yet, so we do not know if Devrim Kay and Mark are actually having a child together. We don't even know if this whole backstory of Devrim Kay being the 8th in his lineage is actually reality anymore. I do think this is a story that could make it into game one day. In the fourth and final story of this lore book, titled Follow the Blue Flowers, it talks about the very early days of the last city. They're celebrating and having this giant festival because the largest pilgrimage of all time, nearly 2,000 people, crossed over an entire continent to make sure they were there safe at the last city. But the story is mostly about this woman, this ranger, this non-light bearer, who organized a group of other non-light bearers to help protect everyone. And she was a symbol of hope and leadership in the early days of the city. And every single time one of her rangers would fall in battle, they would plant a blue flower. And eventually she got overwhelmed at the responsibility of all the leadership that she had been doing. So she traveled far into the mountains and built herself a cabin, only to be ambushed by the Fallen and never seen alive again. But maybe, just maybe, she was rezzed to be a light bearer, and she's out there, not remembering her past, but still protecting over each person of the last city. I hope you enjoyed those stories, and while they may never see the light of day in game and in canon, as it's been 5 years since that book was found and vanished from the files, I hope you found worth in these stories and found adventure. And as I said early on in the video, you can find the entire file below in the comments section if you would like to read more in depth these stories for yourself.